Hi guys. Showing my uh, demo self-portrait here, and as you can see, I've obviously put in the skin tones and done some pretty good rendering of the face and um, the shirt and my neck and everything. But I left the hair so that I could do a little hair demo. I mean, obviously, not everybody has the same kind of hair that I have, but at least this can kind of um, give you an idea of how you can approach the hair. I mean, like I said in class, like you can really approach it just kind of like any other shape. It's sort of, I mean, depending on what your hair is like, um, it can sort of be analogous to drapery, like the way that you would approach doing like fabric or something, because it's like, you know, a form that's not like rigid. Um, it has like a flowy quality and kind of adopts the form that it's, being draped on, right? Like you can kind of think of hair as being draped on your head, basically. Um, so, yeah, let's lock in the hair. I think a good way to start is to just look at sort of like working from um, furthest back to what's in the foreground. So, like thinking about like what are the darkest shadows in the hair, and just blocking that out to begin with. So, what I'm gonna do, if you look at my, I posted the reference photo that I'm working from on Gaptrospace under the week 5 tab, so you can look at the photo that I'm working from, and so you can kind of see how, because of the lighting rather, um, my hair looks kind of like my hair's dark brown, um, but because of the lighting, it does have kind of um, like a cool brown quality, and it's sort of like you can see on the, especially on the right side, it's got some like nice cool highlights on the hair that are like very blue toned. So I'm just gonna mix a really dark brown, and I'm gonna use the phthalo as well as the ultramarine blue, just because the phthalo is such a nice intense color, intense blue, and so it's great for like mixing really really dark tones like this. So I'm gonna mix kind of a cool brown, basically, is what I'm doing on my palette. But since it's a brown, I'm still using like some of the um, is it the cadmium red, like the warm red, because it still is ultimately a brown, so there's going to be a little warmth to it. So I think this is pretty good to start with. Um, just to give that nice dark beginning. We'll just like block out the hair with this nice dark tone. So again, like working general to specific, like that principle is kind of what we're using here, and like just blocking in um, largest sort of shape of the hair, you know, just as you would if you were painting like any other object, you know. I'm just gonna define the overall shape of the hair. And take time to like define, you know, like I'm not just doing like, ooh, straight down or like just a full on like helmet. Like I'm noticing that there's these little, you know, sort of sub shapes within the hair, like where it's sort of gathering and then forming like new little curves. So make sure you're noticing that. And definitely play around to make sure that you're sort of matching the curves of the head. Because to bring it back to like the drapery comparison, it's not going to look right if you're not sort of getting the curves correct with how it's draping on your head, and so it's not going to look quite right if you don't sort of take the time to like define to find those little curves, like when it's curving around the face, for instance. Because otherwise it'll just kind of look like it's this weird shape that's like floating in space rather than being something that's taking form on your head. And then it gets a little more complicated when it comes to the bangs here, because obviously like some of the head kind of shows through, but we can still kind of think about still the larger form, like this still kind of does form a geometric kind of line there. And then also looking at like where does the hairline kind of start. Looks to be about there. So we don't want any like kind of skin like showing above here basically, because that's also pretty important, because if you like make your hairline go like absurdly high or absurdly low, like that also kind of tends to look a little weird. And you can always like make adjustments if you realize that you put it too high or too low. I think that looks pretty good. What you can also do is kind of soften the edges. Like I'm gonna soften the edges here because as you can see, this side of the face is like in shadow, so just softening the edge by just using watered down acrylic. Actually, I'm gonna bring this edge back a little bit, but just softening that edge so that it's not too prominent. And then I'm actually gonna just go in and put like a darkened skin tone here just so that it's not white anymore, and I can kind of adjust that later, but just so that I'm not like leaving it white because it looks weird. There. That's a pretty good start, right? So we've blocked in the hair, the largest, shapes in the hair. And now we can start looking at, what are the major forms happening, sort of just the next level up of like detail. So looking at establishing any large forms that you can kind of see in the hair. And this is another instance where like squinting at your reference photo can be really useful, because that way you're just sort of visually reducing that large shape down into some of its simplest parts. And so what I'm noticing is obviously this side is more in shadow, so there's more, just darkness to this side of the hair. But in this area, there's like kind of a little bit of a, like the hair is sort of like curled a little bit, so it creates this little curve here that's happening. And then as the hair kind of like weaves into that curve, kind of creates that shape. But then there's like this area right here that's in shadow, so we're leaving that dark. And I'm also paying attention to the color temperature, so I'm adding a little more like warm yellow and red, and just a little bit of white to, this overall dark mixture that I made and applied to all of the hair. And I just realized that's a little too light probably, but it's not too light for this, but it's probably a little, this mixture is maybe a little bit too red. So I'm just gonna mix a little more blue into it. This looks a little more accurate. So I'm noticing too that since it's like a curved shape, as it's sort of curving down, then it creates another shadow underneath it. So I'm just gonna define like kind of this curl here, and then there's just like this shape kind of behind it that's like sort of weaving into it. And then there's just a little bit of a curve happening here to kind of define so like where what's causing these little shapes to happen is that there's like sort of a little curl to the hair where it's curling in and out. So just kind of defining those with just a little highlight is enough to kind of communicate that. And then now, I'm noticing like this kind of same tone is showing up a little bit here too. So I might as well, since I already have that on my brush, just kind of bring this in here. And noticing it here as well. So I'm just following like the curves of the hair as it drapes around the face, basically. In the same way that like if it was drapery and the folds kind of, curve around whatever object they're draped around, and also just based on the weight of like the fabric. That kind of establishes what it does with how it behaves. And I'm noticing too, this sort of grouping of hair that's really catching the light as it gets to the scalp. And now I'm going to kind of look at just re-establishing those darkest darks. So I'll go back to that original dark tone that I mixed, and even just add just a tiny bit of ivory black to it, just to intensify it just a little bit. And I just want to go in and just sort of re-establish where those really dark tones are happening. So I'm looking at like, where are those really, really dark shadows occurring that I can redefine before I start doing the highlights, because that's really what's going to bring out the hair. But I just want to sort of bring out some of these first. And now I'm realizing, yeah, that this dark shape kind of is larger than I originally left it. Okay, looking pretty good. I can get it a little glare. So now, you probably can notice if you look at the reference photo that there's these really lovely like blue highlights happening like on the right side of the hair because of the natural cool light that's coming down. So I'm gonna mix again, like using as a base like that color that I already mixed. I'm gonna mix a little blue here, just by adding some blue to it. I'm using the phthalo blue just because it looks chromatically more like a phthalo, even though it's cool light coming in. And there's already ultramarine blue mix in this original mixture anyway, so it won't warm it up too much. And then arriving at this sort of gray-blue shade, and again squinting and sort of seeing where those highlights are concentrated. And I'm noticing that they're most concentrated at basically like the curves of like the hair, the major curves. So that's where the light's, catching them the most. So there's curves happening here. So we can just kind of add little touches there. And then this nice curve here that establishes sort of the form of the hair here by differentiating like this strand of hair from like the shadow that's kind of underneath it. And so notice that I'm not like painting individual strands of hair or anything crazy like that. I'm just looking at the way that the light is hitting this shape, which happens to be hair. But again, it's like basically the same kind of approach that you would take if you were just painting like, you know, a box or something that was catching the light in a certain way, you know? And just making sure that I leave those really dark shadows established and just kind of using these highlights to define how the light is hitting the hair and these different like kind of blocks of hair, because you know, even though their hair is a bunch of tiny strands, like it still kind of forms into little groupings of shapes. So just kind of seeing how that's happening there, and even like bring maybe a little bit of it over here. Like there's a little tiny bit of that coming in over here. Maybe I'll just establish on like the edge there. And it's like a tiny bit more white. This one's just a little bit of like orange just to tone it down a little more. And just kind of add that. Actually, I think I want to maybe mix one that's a little more exaggerated. I think that we could get away with like an even more exaggerated kind of highlight here, because that would look really cool. So I'm just gonna actually mix a more chromatically vibrant mixture, adding more of the phthalo blue. Just defining those highlights again. Don't want to overdo it, but and then we can come in and with our original like really dark mixture and kind of bring back some of those darker tones if they need to be brought back a little bit. If you've overdone it on the highlighting. And then there's like a tiny bit creeps in there. And honestly, it looks pretty good. I mean, I feel like this is enough information to kind of establish, like you kind of understand from this, like what the hair is doing. Like you understand that there's a little bit of a curl to the hair, that it's not just like you know, this flat helmet of hair. It's not like a mushroom head. Like there is some definition to the hair happening, which is nice. And then, like, what I can think about now is like, you know, what do I want to do kind of with the background? Figure since there's this like nice blues happening here with the highlights, I might want to like warm up the background a little bit just as contrast. So, you know, maybe still keep it that, you know, greenish color, but just warming it up a lot so that it has like kind of more contrast with what I've just painted. And maybe using a different blue to mix that green as well so that it's not. I mean, even in the photo, like, the background is kind of more of a brown or something. I don't know, something to kind of differentiate it. I'm not sure if I like that color as like the final background, I suppose. But, you know, I can play around with the color and see kind of what works, but you know, think about how your background interacts obviously with the what's in the foreground. And then obviously, you know, I want to come in and kind of marry these tones here so that the hair, like, so that it's not as harsh basically where the hair is meeting the face. So that will kind of be my next little task to take on, would be kind of further addressing that. And I mean, even just that, like, softened that edge pretty effectively. But, you know, going in and noticing like the tones, like I can see like where it transitions from like the shadow to the skin, there's actually like a really nice, like very warm transition happening. So even like coming in, bringing some a nice orangey tone be nice. Something like that. But anyway, I hope that this hair demo kind of helped you to see how you could approach painting the hair, and like hopefully maybe it doesn't seem to be quite as intimidating. My stomach is growling, so it's time for me to eat lunch. But of course, you know, if you want any individual help or attention, you can always email me your painting and, you know, ask me for advice. But have a great weekend, guys. It's a Labor Day weekend, so I hope you have a chance to enjoy the holiday weekend despite having to get this project finished. But yeah, I'll see you guys next week.